Work management platforms. Ugh, endless onboarding, IT bottlenecks, admin requests. But what if things were different?
We found love in an open space.
Monday.com is different. No lengthy onboarding. Beautiful reports in minutes. Custom workflows you can build on your own. Easy to use prompt-free AI. Turns out you can love a work management platform. Monday.com, the first work platform you'll love to use.
From ADT comes Trusted Neighbor, the new standard in home access. Through the ADT Plus app, easily grant and automate event-based or scheduled access for neighbors, friends, and helpers. Notify trusted individuals of events like alarms or packages, and set access windows for planned guests or even the dog walker without interrupting your day. Visit ADT.com. When every second counts, count on ADT. Requires ADT Complete Pro monitoring plan and compatible devices. Copyright 2025 ADT LLC. All rights reserved.
Hello and welcome to Just Films and That, a podcast where we discuss films that we feel may be underrated, underappreciated, or we just wanted to talk about them. I'm Josh Hallam, and I'm here with Alice Oliver. Alice, how are you?
Josh, I'm pretty good as always, thank you. And yourself?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. We are joined today by some very special guests. They're a writing and directing brotherly duo, Ben and Chris Blaine. How are you?
Very good.
And yourself, Ben?
Yes, I am. I am also good.
Excellent, excellent. So we always start with a completely random question. So I'll come to Alice first to give you an idea. Alice, have you ever been told you look like anyone famous?
So when I was a teenager, I did get told that I looked like Avril Lavigne, but I think that was just because I used to wear eyeliner that was about an inch thick under my eye. So I don't think I actually looked like her. But then more recently, I actually got Stacey Dooley, which I didn't think was too bad. But I think that's literally just because we're both ginger. I don't think we actually look anything alike. But apart from that, no, nothing. And no one too offensive, really, either. What about you, Josh? Have you?
No one that I'd like to write home about. I've had Anton Dubek from Strictly Come Dancing, which in its own way then means I get Rob Brydon because they look like each other.
Oh my god, I see it now.
The best I've ever got is like someone once said I looked a bit like a sort of dishevelled Michael Bublé, which I'd take that.
Oh, yeah,
I'd take that all day. But someone once said that I look like, and I don't know how they managed to say. They said I look like Buzz Lightyear.
Yeah.
A cartoon.
Yeah.
No, I could see that.
Yeah, I've got quite a big, I've got quite a big head.
It's the jaw, man. It's the jaw.
Yeah. Does wonders for your confidence, this question. I wish I hadn't thought of it.
I don't know. Just go with Michael Bublé every time, I reckon.
Yeah, as I say, Michael Bublé in his pomp is what I was told. No, Chris, what about you?
When I don't have lots of hair and a beard, then people sometimes think I look like Heston Blumenthal.
Oh, yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah.
I can see that, totally.
I can kind of see that, yeah. Ben, what about you?
Well, there's one main one, but I will point out there was also a point when Heston and Delia did a kind of joint advert for Waitrose that was half of their faces on either side of a poster, and that did look distressingly like the pair of us. But yeah, mainly people think that I look like Bob Geldof.
Oh, yeah. A little bit.
Okay. A very, very young Bob Geldof.
Yeah, and a bit more like tidier. Like,
today.
No offense to Sub-Bob.
So, it's haunted me throughout most of my life. And also, as a teenager, I used to habitually wear a top hat, and so would be called Jamiroquai at regular intervals as well. So,
Did you really wear a top hat as a teenager?
Did wear a top hat.
Did you?
Yeah,
That's very cool. Like to school and stuff.
Yes. Well, not. On occasions they wouldn't generally look me.
On Mufti Day.
When
you're allowed to come in with whatever you're wearing, and he would come.
Wow.
That was that.
As if I wanted to be bullied. As if I actually wanted everyone to be mean to me. That was sort of
Well, we'll move on to talking about this week's film then. The film that Chris and Ben have chosen between them is a film called Young Adam from 2003. So spoiler warning if you've not seen it. To give you a little bit of background on the plot, if you've not seen it, it's set in the 50s. Ewan McGregor plays Joe, who is a young drifter who's working on a canal barge who's owned by a married couple named Ella and Les. They're played by Tilda Swinton and Peter Mullen. One day, Joe and Les pull out the body of a young woman from the river, from the water, and this sort of sets off a chain of events in which it's revealed that Joe had a lot more to do with the young woman, shall we say, than he's letting on. And meanwhile, he enters into an affair with the unhappily married Ella, who's played by Tilda Swinton, and things kind of begin to unravel in a sort of a observation of his morality. So, quite interested to know. Did you pick this because you think it is underrated, underseen, or you just wanted to talk about it, or a few things? Come to you first, Chris.
I think I would be putting it in the underseen category, actually. It's kind of, it's a really great film and feels like one that is, kind of forgotten about a little bit.
Did you did either of you, did you just come to an agreement on this, or did one of you pick it, or?
We actually came together thinking a whole bunch of a list of stuff because we were a little worried that we would basically just be giving you incredibly obscure art stuff that you'd be like, okay, what's that? So yeah, we tried to give you a little bit of a range of choice, but Young Adam's always sat there as being like a 5-star movie, and also is one of the I think, is it the first by. Oh, my brain's gone completely.
David Mackenzie.
David Mackenzie.
Second, actually.
Second film. He's just great and has gone on to make some amazing films like Hell or High Water, which is just perfect. And so it's really interesting going back to one of his earlier ones to see the progression of his filmmaking, and how he was doing stuff then.
Yeah, and like you say, he's gone on to bigger and better things. Ben, would you agree? Sort of underseen, little bit underrated as well.
Yeah, definitely. Underseen, underregarded, and worth a second look, I think.
I think so, and so I'm interested to know, Alice, because we don't really discuss the films before we sort of record, and we try and take as fresh a look at it as we can. Have you seen this one before, Alice?
I hadn't seen it. I hadn't heard of it. And I found that it was quite difficult to actually get hold of. So I feel like that really adds to the underseen, because I feel like a film is going to be incredibly underseen if it's just not readily available. It wasn't just a case of popping on Netflix or Amazon and there it was.
Yeah,
so that was interesting.
It's about to go on Apple, and I think that they've literally just taken it off everywhere. And I think around the middle of February, by the time this goes out, it will actually be more widely available again, which is good for the people listening to this podcast. But yeah, it was quite difficult last night when I thought I should rewatch it.
Oh, interesting. So why was that then? Is that because Apple got a hold of it and they were like, right, remove it from everywhere so we can have
whatever they say goes, otherwise everyone's information ends up in the cloud.
Josh, what about you? Were you familiar with this one?
I knew of the director, and I think I'd heard of the title, but I'd never seen it, and I was quite surprised that, like you say, it is quite underseen, because obviously it's got a fairly known cast in it. It's certainly, Ewan McGregor, Peter Mullen, and Tilda Swinton, obviously three massive stars in their own right. So I was interested to watch this. So I'll come to you first, Alice. What did you think?
So I did really enjoy it, and I think that there were a lot of good points about it. So I love the barge as a location and as such a staple of the film. I thought that was great, and then obviously the river then that comes with that, and you get such great sounds and such great sights from that being like this moving location. So I thought that was great, and it sort of adds. Because it's kind of intimate but uncomfortable at the same time. Because obviously they're all living in such close proximity to each other, and it's quite a strange dynamic, and you're not 100% sure like sort of who's who and how is each character sort of related to one another. Because you don't get, I really like this about it, you don't just get these endless lines of dialogue explaining everything and explaining who everyone is. It was really just a show, don't tell. like there was barely any dialogue in it at all, really. I can't imagine that the script was pages and pages long. So I really like that. It was really just kind of more of a visual storytelling than just, hi, I'm this character. It's like, oh, hey, I'm this character, which can just be a bit, just a bit vapid sometimes, I feel.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't sort of it doesn't spoon feed you as the audience. It allows you to sort of fill in the blanks, and because it's told in a non-linear way in terms of skipping between the past and the present, that slow reveal of what has actually happened in the characters' lives is where you get, I think, the satisfaction from. And you're right, the script does a lot with little. So like there's some really sort of interesting monologues in there. Like one of the lines I wrote down in my notes was, I've shed my own skin and moved into the fog, which I really enjoyed. I thought that was like a really sort of visceral, almost visual line. And you can tell that the character himself is meant to be a writer. And we know, writers like to write writers because you write what you know, I guess. So no, I agree. I thought the script was really interesting, and I like that slow reveal. I don't know, Ben, what did you think of the script?
Yeah, I mean, the script is fantastic. The script is also interesting because it's a very, very truthful representation of the novel that it's based on, the Alexandra Trocchi book. And that line is kind of, that you picked, is actually kind of one of the most famous lines from the book. And actually sort of going back to the book, it's really interesting to see how, because Mackenzie wrote the script as well as directing it, how kind of faithful he's been, even in sort of terms of quite often, like at the start, like that potato that she throws into the bucket, that is a specific thing from the, that is like, that really matters, that potato. Yeah, I just think, again, he's done a really, really good job of, like, the big difference from because the book is all entirely inside Joe's head and is entirely kind of this sort of interior narrative, which of course is a bit similar to kind of the other kind of famous Scottish misanthrope that Ewan McGregor played from Trainspotting, where again that book is a very kind of internal thing that then has been turned into a much more kind of external. Obviously, they heavily rely on voiceover, whereas this, all of the kind of internal kind of craziness that's going on inside Joe is done entirely through performance. And I think what's interesting about the script is how much confidence he has as a director and as a writer to give stuff to the actors and to let the actors take it on. And in some ways, it's, some of the stuff, I think particularly Tilda Swinton, which she brings to that character, is much more nuance and insight than that character has in the book. Not that it isn't, it is definitely written, she's taking what's there on the page, but there are a couple of moments that, like a kind of, almost a last moment in the film where Ewan McGregor's character is just leaving the boat with her sister, and she just looks back at him, sort of longing for this kind of connection between them. And it's just her performance. It's just the way that she does that. And there's no hint of that in the book. And I think it's really interesting, kind of, again, sort of watching a director kind of see where a thing has its weaknesses and where its strengths are, and going, well, okay, it's weak here, so what do I do to support that? To
how do I bring the sort of more dimmer parts to life, if you like? And you're right. A good thing about the direction of it is that he obviously lets the actors. He has his faith in these actors, who are obviously very well accomplished actors, to bring the the characters to life.
You can't have faith in Tilda Swinton.
Well, yeah, you might as well. You might as well give up, because who else are you going to get? I mean, she could play anybody. She could play that potato at the start, and she'd probably be in heavy makeup and be pretty good. But no, you're right, and the love and sort of affection the director, and obviously who also wrote it, has for the piece, for the book, is quite clear, because I think I read somewhere he spent something like 10 years developing it, and that's quite clear that he's gone through it with a fine tooth comb and chosen what he wants to keep and chosen what he wants to sort of highlight. If you like, what about you, Chris? Did you sort of like the script?
Yeah. There's a real darkly comic thing going on all the way through it, where you're kind of like, blackly comic, I suppose, is actually the best way of describing it, because it really is like, you just have to be a bit jet black to just find where it's going funny, but it sort of is funny. I find anyway. But I do indeed enjoy it very much.
Interesting that you feel like you found it funny, and then Josh, you sort of nodded a bit there. Maybe I had a different viewing experience. I didn't really find it funny at all. Isn't that interesting though? That
It
you
is.
kind of come away with it with such a different view.
It is, and that's like why we like talking about stuff like that, isn't it? Because everyone has their own reactions. I know exactly what you mean, Chris, in sort of the absolute almost desperation and grit of the film. How that's kind of funny, and in the way that, despite the fact the way he's living, he still sees himself as this, a moralistic drifter, come writer, if you will. And he's one of these people. He's got flexible morals in the sense of he'll just do whatever suits him. Like you say.
I mean, I think literally every single female character in the film he has sex with.
I've written that in my notes. Literally, there's not a single adult female who he doesn't have sex with. Apart, if you don't count the extras in the courtroom scene, and we can't write it out. We can't write that out. So.
But you just you sort of get to a point where it's like meets the guy in the pub who's like, oh yeah, I'm looking for a lodger. Yeah, I work nights. And you're just like,
bingo.
You're just like, oh dear, this is just and just a complete circle of just a vicious circle that's just getting deeper and deeper on him.
I think what's interesting is it's people talk about it as Trotch's first novel, but looking into it's the first of his kind of long series of pornographic books that he took some of the porn out of and then got it published as a kind of straight novel. So I imagine the original draft, he probably did sleep with everyone in the courtroom as well. But it's interesting. It's kind of like, I don't know. I think it's really fascinating, again, seeing something that comes from somewhere so tawdry and still has that stamped into it, but within the kind of the crazy soft porn kind of, it's almost like, Adventures of a Window Cleaner, Adventures of a
No,
bargeman.
You're right. You are. The sort of the correlation between those two things is very strange. When I was looking for it to watch it, when it said erotic thriller or erotic drama, I was like, I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. But I quite like the fact that it is an erotic drama, erotic thriller. But it's almost like a kitchen sink drama or like a Mike Leigh film at the same time. It's not it's not Fatal Attraction or Striptease or one of these sort of early 90s erotic thrillers, Basic Instinct, if you like. But it is an erotic thriller. It's like a real erotic thriller set in the 50s.
Yeah.
In that sense, and that's something I quite liked. I like that. That's not something certainly not something I'd seen done before.
Yeah, and you sort of, I mean, especially when you think if you're going, okay, right, you're going to write an erotic thriller as a movie, then you're like, okay, the noose starts tightening around him, and oh my goodness, what scrapes he going to get into? And the direction that the film goes to actually squeeze the noose around him is really interesting, because it's, effectively he's getting away scot-free, except he's really not. Yeah,
I think that, I mean, again, that's almost one of the reasons why where that sort of black sense of humor comes from, because he actually wins at every turn. Everything he wants, he gets, but just in the worst possible way, and in a way that destroys him. And I think it's really fascinating, because as Chris says, nothing actually goes wrong for him. Just everything goes wrong for him, but it's kind of like, his ex-girlfriend turns up and she's pregnant and he doesn't want anything more to do with her, and she falls into the canal and dies.
Yeah, it doesn't even push her, she just falls.
Yeah, it's not like he doesn't even behave awfully. It's just gone forever from his life. And
I mean, he could have tried to,
rest.
Jump in at least. Like he's definitely shown that he can jump into water and save someone earlier in the movie.
That is true.
Someone who about 3 minutes before she falls in, he's gone, there's this really annoying kid on the boat who he has saved that kid's life. So
yeah, but again, it's like at that moment in time when she's like, look, I'm pregnant. He does want her to just disappear, and then she does, and it's again, it's everything he
It's
wants,
a little bit
gets, and
monkey's paw, isn't it? It's a little bit sort of like careful what you wish for, but also but with a touch of amoralistic sort of weird sort of examination of why he's doing these things. Like you say, the laws of a happy narrative, if you want a happy ending, are that something happens at the end, the guy doesn't get hung, and he doesn't get hung, maybe he gets away or something like that. But no, he just sort of lets him die, and then that's it. And it's like, oh, it's quite. But that is that what more people would do than in the sort of fairy tale version of this story? Probably.
The version where he stands up in court and shouts, "It wasn't him." It's not a good film, but it's interesting as well because he almost does nothing. Like he's an incredible. It reminded me weirdly of Hamlet in that Hamlet sort of famously spends sort of 3 hours supposedly not quite doing anything, but actually he does kill quite a few people, and like he actually he puts on a play. It's like he does all sorts of things. Whereas,
accomplished.
Exactly,
It's quite a lot for your CV there.
He's also a door monitor, I expect. But whereas Joe in this, apart from having sex with literally everybody, doesn't actually, he doesn't write a book. He doesn't go to China. He doesn't kill his ex-girlfriend. He, the one thing he does actively do that feels like a decision, because even sleeping with people, he doesn't commit to a new relationship with someone. He just has sex with them in that moment and then usually wants to never see them again. The one thing that he does do is write this letter saying, I can't tell you how I know this, but I know that this guy's innocent. And it takes that kind of like, there's the bit where he sort of walks in, it's like there's the risk of dropping the letter off. And I just think it's really beautiful. His surprise is almost sort of our surprise in watching films of that then does nothing in the way that, of course, it does nothing. But because it's a film, you sort of expect, like, he drops the letter and, like you see the clerk kind of pick it up and you're kind of like, yeah, and then we're like probably going to follow that letter and, like the guy's going to be going out to the gallows and something going to come running out with a letter. And it's like, no, it's just
can't prove it. Carry on.
No one paid attention.
I feel like there was a lot of that going on. This sort of moments that would be like truly like remarkable or really dramatic in ordinary films were just not in this. So like you say, when Kathy falls into the water, she just falls and she's gone. There's no struggle. There's no, there's no weapons. He didn't push her. She's not screaming or anything. It's just 1 second she's there and then she's gone. And then it happens again when Joe and Ella, they wake up, they've accidentally fallen asleep after having sex and they can hear Les sort of stomping on the boat above. And there's no mad rush to try and get dressed and like, oh shit, he knows we're here or whatever. They're not, charging to be all apologetic to him or whatever. They're just like, oh, do you think he knows? We're like, yeah, he knows. And it's all just like, it's so much underreacting and just no overreacting. And I really like that because you can see as these moments are building and you're like, oh, we're about to have the big confrontation. This is going to happen, especially like you say with the letter. And it's just like, he's going to go, wait, this man is innocent. And it's like, nope, it just doesn't happen at all. And I feel like that leaves you with like a really different feeling to most other films. And I really appreciated that for sure.
It's very naturalistic, isn't it?
Yeah, I get like that moment with Les when he comes back and finds him in bed. Again, what I thought was so brilliant was, again, this way of writing problems as successes is so surprising and so powerful. So they kind of have this standoff and Joe's like, you can hit me if you want, and kind of Peter Mullen as Les kind of comes up to him and sort of goes to swing and then doesn't. And then basically says, well, it's not my boat, so I'm leaving. And you just hadn't seen that coming at all because he's been such the kind of alpha male, awful figure that you hadn't realised that Tilda Swinton's character is actually in charge all the way along. And he just packs his stuff and goes. And suddenly, without, Joe's won this whole new life without trying, without wanting to. And suddenly it's like, oh, this is my problem. I'm now living on a barge with this woman who wants to move to the suburbs of Leith. It's like, how did that happen? It's this sort of fantastic kind of, he's won, but he won nothing he wanted. Like
he's won like mediocrity.
Yeah,
you're right. A stepdad, which I don't think he really wants. Does he?
To a kid, he keeps saying he wants to kick off the boat.
Yeah,
yeah. I suppose really you're going. What he wants is punishment. I mean, like
yeah,
and he doesn't ever get that gratification, basically.
He wants
Yeah.
punishment almost, so he's absolved, but actually he kind of doesn't want punishment because if he did, he would have given himself up. He wants to say he's done what he can, but like you say, it's that study in him being this amoralistic sort of character, and like you say, Ben, the film kind of happens to him as it's happening to us as the viewer, and that's quite interesting. That it's something that's so naturalistic, and the stakes are kind of, with the exception of that hanging, the stakes are just so low. Because no,
and even then, the hanging is kind of it's
yeah,
not him.
It's no
not a
one you really
character,
know.
Yeah.
One thing I was quite interested that I think I would say I did love the script and I love the performances. One of the things I really, really loved, and I'm not someone who knows that much about the practical side of filmmaking, but I loved the cinematography. So like the shots of there's a couple of shots of particularly Ewan McGregor and Peter Mullen walking over the top of the barge as it's moving, and it's quite hypnotic. You know, it's like a lava lamp or something as he's walking across the canal barge. I like that, and I liked, you know, everything is foggy and their fingernails are grimy. You know, like it's like I was saying, this is not a polished world that we're living in. This is a real 1950s world where, you know, people are poor and people are washing in tin baths and all that sort of thing. And I quite like that. I quite that mixed with, you know, shots of the canal moving through these tiny claustrophobic corridors of water in with houses either side, or going into tunnels with, you know, people having to duck, and it all builds that claustrophobia. But I really liked that, combining that with the kind of color palette of the film. It gave it all the look of like I guess quite like a bleak painting or something like that, and that really, I think that really helped draw you into the world, if you like.
It didn't feel like
sure.
1950s. It felt like ages ago. Like it felt like it could have been in the early 1800s or something. Like it didn't feel like it was only then. Like when you think about, like, you know, the kind of musicians and kind of the scene that was going on in the 50s, this just feels completely removed from all that.
Yeah, for sure.
There, interestingly, one subsequent film that it reminded me of watching it again was oh God, Oscar Isaac.
Inside Llewyn Davis. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Similar period, and has that same kind of like a lead character who is constantly not engaging and not taking action.
I mean, that's a Coen Brothers movie, isn't it? You kind of go,
I mean,
I was actually going to bring up the Coens as the way you go, this is like a straight version of a Coen Brothers movie, which is kind of where, you know, the black humor in effect, where you go, the Coens, if they made this as a film, they would just be laughing their asses off all the way through it. You know, like Peter Mullen would be played by, I guess, Michael Bertolucci. You know, like definitely, it's a fat man who's going to do some shouting. And they'd lean in a bit to the dialogue. You know, this is definitely much straighter than that.
Particularly the custard.
I thought that scene that scene was fantastically brutal. That reminded me of things like that I've seen at the theatre, you know, and like I say, things like Mike Leigh films, you know, where this sort of brute of the man, or actually, funnily enough, a little bit like speaking of Peter Mullen, a little bit like something like Tyrannosaur. You know, this sort of brutal show of animalistic strength, you know, domination. And it was quite difficult, which is, like you say, in the wrong hands. It's kind of, that could be played for laughs, that scene, throwing custard over someone.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Emily Mortimer is just amazing in that scene where you're going, there are so many emotions that she's expressing through all of that, what's happening to her, that it's really, you know, like a straighter way of doing that scene is, well, this is terrible. But she's not. She's kind of like, there's parts where you're going, oh, are you actually enjoying this? I'm not quite sure. And then when she breaks, you're like, whoa, that's actually, that's really harsh.
Yeah. I mean, again, that is going back to the book. That is all literally that, you know, what page line for line. Like the only sort of difference between how that's written is that the source gets more complicated in the book, and involves some blue ink and stuff that he goes to find, which I can see why they just turned that into ketchup and brown sauce. But again, the kind of
was the stuff that he sprinkled on afterwards? What's that? Flour. Okay.
Yeah, it's flour. Yeah, and again, in the book, it is really completely ambivalent and unsure as to whether she is laughing or crying. And I thought that, again, the way that they captured that in the film was really, really powerful. And again, but then equally sort of similar to kind of, you know, Tilda Swinton, I thought some of the later scenes with her, particularly like the beautiful scene when they say goodbye with that spiral staircase. Again, what Emily Mortimer brings to that character is so much depth and reality that I think in some ways makes the film actually better than the book, because the book sort of deliberately doesn't want to give any other characters any kind of reality to them. You know, you see everyone through him and he doesn't see anyone as real, and the film can't do that. And or rather, the film could do that, and many films do that. And I think what's so brilliant about the film is that it has the space to let those side characters breathe and become real, and let you then see him for the damaged, shallow, struggling person that he is, rather than just seeing them through him.
So I read a little bit about the book, having watched the film. So is it much different? I mean, I know you've already sort of touched on this, but is it pretty much the same? Or?
It's pretty much this. Yeah, it's. I mean, clearly, it's a labour of love for Mackenzie. He clearly kind of wanted to capture that book, and interestingly, one of the biggest, and it's so tiny but also sort of huge differences is the ending, because the book ends in the courtroom, and it's just there's just one more scene in the film, but I think the ending in the film clearly is another reference back to, again, the line that you quoted, the kind of "I lose myself and become one with the mist," and that's McGregor sort of he goes back to the place where she fell in and looks and then walks away, and we kind of lose him. And brilliantly, he doesn't look into the camera. There was a moment where I was like, oh God, does he look into the camera at this point? Which would have been really kind of...
The end of The Bourne Identity or something, like Moby starts playing and he walks off into another European country.
DiCaprio at the end of The Revenant, where you're kind of like, do you understand the pain I've been through? You're like, yeah, we've been watching, mate. We've been watching.
It's quite long. I've seen a lot of it. I suppose we haven't really touched on Ewan McGregor's performance that much. Because this would have been quite sort of peak Star Wars, huge start.
It's just pre-Star Wars, but it's interesting because I was thinking about the whole film is, it came out in 2003, but like you say, it took 10 years to do, and watching it now, it really struck me how it feels like the last film of the 90s, and how filmmaking changed since then, and like what could get made changed after that. And for him too, it's kind of like after this, he's all Star Wars and this, that, and the other. But it's he's recently sort of been able to come back and do some fantastic performances. But he went through a very kind of a lost period, didn't he? Where he sort of was just earning a lot of money and being very successful, but wasn't in a place to kind of deliver this kind of performance, which I think is so contained. And again, could be so, and he's so charming whilst being so grim. That's not quite the right word, is it? But he's not
bleak. Yeah, he's not
charming whilst being unlikable.
Yeah, he is. You are right. And if he was, a real person, he is. If you actually look at his actions, he is a bit of a scumbag.
Yeah,
he doesn't act in a sort of nice way. He objectifies and treats women like objects. He is, like we've already said, sort of not very he's quite morally ambiguous, I guess. Yeah. And that's a difficult thing to play whilst also making him a likable person.
I think I suppose in a way that is Ewan McGregor's greatest skill, I think, is, because Brenton's like that in Trainspotting. It's kind of like, he's not a nice person, but he's so charming because he's Ewan McGregor at the same time. And when I see Ewan McGregor being a nice person, like I often just get overwhelmed by how nice Ewan McGregor is, and it just becomes almost unwatchably nice. And there's no tension there. But
it's much nicer when you're going, play an arsehole.
Yeah.
Go on, play an arsehole. You're great at arseholes.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, I think I read when I was reading about the film that this is one of the only films he didn't like take his family to set. And I was like, well, I can see why A, it's on a canal barge, and B, doesn't wear clothes for a lot of it. So I can imagine why he wouldn't. I mean, Alice, come to you. What did you think of his performance?
Oh yeah, brilliant. I mean, he's brilliant in everything, right? And he's just nice to see. Like, I just always enjoy seeing him on screen. I got a lot of respect for anyone who goes full frontal, especially men as well. Like, I feel like it is much more rare. And I had thought that maybe that was why the film was so hard to find, because obviously Tilda and Ewan McGregor, now Disney own them both. So I was like, oh, if Disney tried to kind of have like quash it and be like, you can't get your dick out because the kids are gonna see or whatever. But no, like you say, the other thing makes a lot more sense. But yeah, no, just brilliant. And
they did try and cut that scene though when it was released in the States, and he actually insisted that scene was included in it.
Really
That's
interesting,
brave,
because
isn't
I
it?
was surprised because we saw there was obviously a lot of female nudity, and then I think it was only once where he was completely nude at the front.
Yeah.
But I was surprised. I was just like, oh, because you just don't see it as much as naked women, and I've got a lot of time for that. It's nice to see some real equality.
Yeah, he's always very good with sex as well, in terms of the playing of sex in the way that you truly believe that he is actually working his penis in and out, and take it like. But there is a thing of like, when you get to the point of like, oh yeah, have they just had sex? And normally in films it's like, and away we go, let's bring up the sheets, and wasn't that lovely? And with him, he's always like, there's a certain amount of like, in Trainspotting where he has had sex with
Kelly
MacDonald's character, and she throws him out, and then he's pulling off a condom whilst he's left in the corridor, and it's like he's always got this sense of the physicality. He's willing to do that in a way that a lot of people, it's like, okay, I might show it, but I don't really want to go there, in a way that he's just completely and utterly natural with it.
And it must be so awkward as well, trying to act and with a whole crew of people watching you, and the director going, no, not like that, you need to touch her ear, or like, oh no, just pull that up a little bit more, and whatever. So I think they all did a really good job, because there was a lot of sex in it, but everyone gave a cracking performance.
To the point where you're going, how is the fly in the book? Because that, of the bits of filmmaking where you're just like, so there's a close-up shot of Tilda Swinton's breast with a fly crawling across it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Okay, that must have. How did you do that? Like, that's actually kind of quite hard to accomplish. Like, it's just a close-up, but it's like,
it's an incredible close-up. Yeah.
It's a strange day at work, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. Okay, so we're get the fly in. Okay.
Yeah. How was work? Well,
Varnished planks did not fit tightly together, and the varnish looked unsmooth and brittle. For the last few minutes, I'd been conscious of the buzz of a fly, and now it alighted on Ella's shoulder and walked towards the nipple of her right breast. She appeared to be unaware of it. Her head leant over to the side of her hairs of her temple was stringy with perspiration.
I mean, we made a film where we had actual moths in it, and getting them out of their little containers and trying to revive them with sugar water, and it was all just quite hopeless, and we ended up CGIing, doing CG moths to actually have anything flying around in what we were doing. And yeah, just that fly where you're like, okay, how did you do that? That's got to have taken ages, isn't it? To have, it's not like you can go, okay, so we just need you to walk from here to here. Okay, well, that wasn't quite right. Let's do another take of that.
It's the same fly that landed on Mike Pence, so...
Still going strong. I don't know why, but I love it. I love it in films when people are just smoking constantly, like just cigarette after cigarette, not even cigarettes, roll-ups as well. And I don't even think he had any filters or anything. I just love it. I feel like there's just something so like, I don't know, just real about it, and it's just really like working class and just really gritty. And I just really enjoyed that, but I'm not sure why. I mean, I do enjoy the occasional cigarette, but
the grimness of the cigarette left on the floor whilst doing it in the back alley.
Yes, that was good.
Yeah.
That was great, because it's like, oh, that literally lasted about 10 seconds. Like it was literally just, oh, better get it in. Oh, I'm done. And it's like, oh, okay.
Just finish my cigarette.
That was good.
She was brilliant as well as the sister. I thought she was fantastic.
Yeah, she does a lot with a sort of with only a few scenes, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And she's so different to Tilda Swinton. Tilda Swinton's so sort of reserved and quite clearly unhappy and unfulfilled, so quite emotionless, but then very emotional in certain parts. But she is, this grieving widow who is also feels something for Joe. And it's, you're right. She does do it. She does give a good performance.
She's very outwardly sexual though as well, like her whole look, like everything. I think even when they turn up, like her top or whatever is like all done all the way down, she's like, oh sorry, I didn't know you were coming or whatever. It's like, yeah, you did, come on, you knew they were going to turn up. But I don't think she even tries to fix it either. It's like you think she's going to like put something on and cover her up. So she's just and she doesn't really seem to be, I don't feel like she's sad, right, that her husband's died.
She isn't.
No. She happy about that? Was he a bit of a dick to her? That's the impression I got.
Yeah, that's definitely the impression I got too. Yeah.
For sure.
So we'll move on now to things that we perhaps didn't like about the film or that we'd change. Alice, is there anything for yourself?
You know what? Pretty much no. There wasn't anything that I didn't like necessarily. The only thing that I was a bit like, was when he threw the typewriter in the river. I just thought that was really cheesy. I just felt like I'd seen that or seen similar things to that like a million times over. And it was just like, the creative kind of being like, I'm never going to write again. But apart from that, no, not really. But I thought that bit did stand out a little bit as being a little bit cheesy. I feel
that's the sort of thing like a bit of a sort of pretentious writer would do. Except now it'd be a MacBook. But, but I know what you mean. It did seem it's a little bit more dramatic than some of the other stuff is portrayed in the film, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you couldn't do that now, though, could you? Like throwing a typewriter into the canal is a certain kind of like 1950s angsty writer thing to do. Whereas if you threw your MacBook in, it's kind of like, well, all the files are stored in the cloud, so
you've just wasted money there.
Yeah, it's not the same, is it? It's all on my iPhone.
Chris, what about you?
So the scene where they have sex under the wagon in cold, wet, rainy Scotland on the docks, and they're both butt naked and very sensual and slow, and you're like, I mean, that must have been fucking freezing for them, and so just that sense of it's portrayed as if you're in a really nice, I mean, effectively the way it feels is like, they're in quite a warm space, but it looks really cold. In that respect, I would be like, wouldn't it have been a bit faster? They probably would have been getting on with it a bit quicker, a little less.
There would be sort of no pillow talk or anything like that at the end. There'd be sort of like, it is freezing, though, isn't it?
I feel like you can see their breath, right? Like you do really get a sense of how freezing cold it is, and they're acting like it's a July night in Spain or something.
Yeah,
it's like but definitely.
Ben, what about yourself?
No, I mean the only thing is that the book end, like I say, the book ends in the courtroom, and they do play the ending. So it's literally he just sits there and can't believe that his writing of a letter hasn't changed the world. And the man's taken away, and the courtroom clears, and he's just sat there on his own, unable to move. And I can see why you then want to have the scene afterwards with him kind of walking away, but there's something to me, there's something about particularly a character that starts out in motion on a barge. So he's sort of outdoors in motion, to end up with him stuck in this room, in this limbo of like, it's a room where one character has gone off to punishment and he hasn't gone off to punishment. But that's where he should go, and so he can't go anywhere. Like I think if you'd found a way of ending it just there and really highlighting his lack of motion at that point, I think that would have been even more powerful. But
it's quite poetic, isn't it? Sounds like the book has that sort of, he's literally sitting in the room where justice is served, the scales are tipped, and yet he sits there in this limbo where the scales are tipped neither way, and he just doesn't know what to do with himself.
Yeah.
That's interesting you talking about the movement, because the way the film is shot, there's barely any camera movement in it. And
Yeah.
the last shot is I think the only one that I'm looking at going, oh, okay, you're using a jib whilst you're tracking around.
Yeah.
Everything else is pretty, like there's the occasional move in. There's some tracking with the boats.
Yeah.
But that's about it. It's really quite
it's very static, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So yeah, that sense of wanting that, like you're going, you feel like you wanted him to be stuck.
Yeah.
Is you're going, well, actually, yeah, the camera's moving there, which is giving you that feeling of like, oh, do I actually want you to be doing that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But I mean, it's funny is that you can't really check. Like, it is also a film that you couldn't make now, and I think that like I do think that Swinton and Mortimer do incredible work to make the inherent misogyny of the story have more nuance to it, not make it more palatable, but to highlight that that's what it is. But I don't think it's a film that you could make now, or particularly would make now. But I think it's really, again, it's really interesting seeing, like sort of, like I say, this sort of film that in some ways is the last film of the 90s and 80s, and this sort of it's sort of one of the last great. I mean, Jeremy Thomas produced it, and it came out at the same time as The Dreamers, and he sort of hasn't really hit a high since, an equivalent high since then. And it's still, it's looking back to the 1950s and that generation of kind of selfish, angry white men who felt that they weren't getting what they deserved. And, like, I think if you work it out, Joe is actually about the same age as either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And that it's sort of a really interesting, like, looking at it as the book in the 50s and then the film from the kind of late 90s, early 2000s on that period. It's a really interesting kind of look back on Britain across that period, and Britain in response to the war in particular, and sort of what the war did to the generation that came after it, and sort of what they inherited and how they dealt with that badly.
It's funny.
yeah.
It's funny you say that. So where where I'm originally from has a lot of canals. I am going somewhere. This isn't like it has a lot of canals. So a lot of the shots.
Whereabouts?
I'm from near Chorley and Preston, and so there's a lot of canals there. The Manchester and the Leeds Liverpool canals, and I also have family in Clitheroe where there's a lot of sort of that like you say, like canals and stuff. And so when my grandma, who's now nearly 90, talks about her childhood and when she was a young woman, which would have been around this time, I've never, now that I think about it, I've never seen something that's probably closer than what I imagined. Like we've said, even right down to the color palette. It's like when people do describe that time, you almost see it in sepia, even though it wasn't. And it's funny. I almost made me a little bit, especially given the fact that I can't go anywhere. Made me a little bit homesick, I guess, in that sense. And then I threw my typewriter into a canal, and I was just,
Did it make you think again about some of your grandmother's stories of her youth?
My yeah.
What did you get up to back then, Grandma? Well,
now that I think about it, especially this one about this bloke that she didn't confess about, and then he got hung. And
what's just want to ask, why is it called Young Adam? Is that something that's explored at all in the book? Is it a reference to Adam from the Bible? That's just always what I assume when I hear the name Adam.
Yeah, I think it's also, the boat is called the Atlantic Eve, and that occurred to me that there must be.
It is, isn't it?
So I assume that it is. It's not referenced in the book, and I assume that it is a kind of a loss of innocence, and that there is a kind of a loss of innocence arc.
I was like trying to, why is it called Young Adam? And the closest thing I could find was it's a reference to the fall of man. It's a reference to the loss of innocence in Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
That the Garden of Eden. The whole famous story.
Yeah, you know the one.
The one, the guys in the garden.
Yeah, of course. Oh, the boat, of course, is called the Atlantic Eve. Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you. Question answered for sure.
So we will move on now to talking about the critical reception that the film received. So obviously you picked this mainly because I think I'm right in thinking it's underseen. But we always like to have a little chat about is it underrated based on the sort of the reception at the time. So to give you an idea, IMDb gives it at the time of recording 6.4, and the Rotten Tomatoes gives it 62%. From the critics are quite similar, and the audience give it 49%. So what what would you say about that, Chris? Is that underrated?
Yeah, I would say so. Like well, I mean, actually, I think I remember when it came out. We saw it when it came out, and I remember then the reception at the time was, ooh, not quite sure. You know, I remember reading quite a few reviews that weren't just weren't raving about it. They were kind of, they were slightly unsure as to how they felt. So yeah, I do feel like that is doing it a disservice in a way, because
Yeah. I always try and look on things like Rotten Tomatoes. I always try and look for reviews around about the time when it came out. What did they actually have to say about it, good or bad? And for this, there wasn't really anything they said that was, there wasn't this bit was ridiculous, or the music was distracting, or this performance was terrible, or anything like that. It was just sort of like the critics might as well have said, it's just a bit bleak for me. But that's not really a criticism, because it is quite a bleak story. I don't know. What do you think, Ben? Would you say that's underrated?
Yeah, I'd definitely say it's underrated. I think that it is a very uncomfortable film. And I think particularly at the time, because of who Ewan McGregor was, the audience are going to that film wanting Trainspotting, and so Trainspotting has uncomfortable elements in it, but it's a very cleverly reassuring, life-affirming film, and you come away from Trainspotting with a spring in your step, thinking how great heroin is, and you don't think that, but it's a very uplifting film, despite the very many grim things that happen in it. Whereas
it is a story of someone sort of getting over their addiction, isn't it, and moving on, isn't it?
Exactly. Whereas this is, again, this is very much it's a film where the lead character does nothing, and gets some things that he doesn't deserve, and then gets a kind of internalized punishment, whilst apparently getting away scot-free with not actual murder, but but it's not an uplifting story by any means. And I think I can understand why at the time, an audience goes wanting more Ewan McGregor, and yes, they get him completely naked, but apart from that, it's kind of like it's not quite the Ewan McGregor that you were expecting. Whereas I think perhaps watching it now, it's slightly easier to watch it as a performance rather than as part of a star's history. It's kind of like you're not necessarily expecting to see the star Ewan McGregor. You're just able to enjoy what I do think is an absolutely fantastic performance by him.
Oh, absolutely. And it's almost that downside of fame, which people have sort of talked about, certainly more recently, which is you become a product. And if people are going in expecting, like you say, Trainspotting, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Big Fish, or something like that, then you're not going to get that. And if you've ever appreciated an actor and wanted to sort of watch everything they've done, there is stuff. Not everything is hit after hit after hit, because an actor will take a job and an actor will do what they can with a role. But sometimes, if work's coming in, you've got to be able
sometimes
to
it just doesn't work out,
It's
a hard thing to get right.
Yeah. But I mean, I think, and I think it's not a film for everybody, and it's not a film for every mood. It's not, what should we put on tonight? Hey, I know, let's
it's a 4-quadrant movie.
That would probably be like the only thing I had to say about it, which is like, I can't imagine sitting there being like, should we put Young Adam on a Saturday on a Saturday. But then a lot of the great films, I've never said that about Schindler's List. I've never even said it really about anything like something like The Godfather, because these films are these beautifully, wonderfully crafted things, but they're not always something you want to unwind with. Sometimes
Mm.
sometimes
but I
you do
think-
want, a Marvel
Yeah.
film or something.
Absolutely, but I think also it's not actually. It's sort of not actually depressing. Like there are some films that sort of fall into like Leaving Las Vegas, where you go, that is just relentlessly, remorselessly awful in a brilliant way, but awful. And you go, yeah, I never want to watch that again, though I adored it. Or Downfall, amazing film. I never want to see Downfall again. Not fun. Particularly, I don't want to see it re-subtitled for comic purposes. I think I've had that one. But whereas, it was nice actually to do this and to go, because again, I hadn't actually watched it since we saw it, and I think we saw it in Edinburgh. So like before it was even officially released, it's like we probably saw the premiere of it.
Yeah.
For one of the first couple of screenings, and I can see it had a huge impact on us without quite noticing at the time. Like I knew I'd enjoyed it, but there were sort of bits of it that I've seen come out in our work since that I hadn't quite realised had gone in quite as deep as they had. But I think it is a film that actually rewards multiple viewings. But yeah, you definitely have to, But if you're in the mood for watching amazing actors, then just some of the sequences of Mullen and Peter Mullen and Tilda Swinton and Ewan McGregor, just some of those sequences are just edible.
Peter Mullen is just he can be the warmest, cuddliest type character in the world, and then before you know it, he can be the nastiest bastard you've ever seen.
Yeah,
and it's such a skill to be able to do that. But no, you're right. It's wonderfully performed, very well written, looks amazing. So, and it's definitely one I think people should see if they like the actors that are in it. And
and again, like the way Swinton goes from like starts out and she's just so kind of like browbeaten and down, and you just kind of like that character. And normally in films, that woman is just unhappy, and like the most she hopes for is someone to come along and push her horrible husband into the water, and then she gets to go away happy with her child. And you go, that's your lot. And instead, she has this whole arc where she discovers this love that she didn't think that she was worthy of, and sort of discovers this sexuality and this freedom, and then has this whole kind of strength and power, and then it's an incredible kind of journey that she takes that character on. And I think that it's so brilliant watching someone see what what is a secondary character and go, I can play this as a lead character, and I can take this kind of like footnote person and turn them into a woman, a person who actually has a story, and it gets to the point where I can just give you that one look, and that breaks your heart, and that tells you all you need to know about her future and her past. It's just, it's a brilliant performance.
Well, there we go. I think we're all agreed. It's underseen. It's underrated. So we'll add it to the ever-growing pile of underseen and underrated films. Chris, Ben, thanks very much for coming on. Hope you enjoyed talking about it. What do we see from you guys next?
So on BBC iPlayer at the moment, you can see Out of Her Mind, which is a comedy series written and starring Sarah Pascoe, which is
nothing like Young Adam.
No, but is I mean, actually, it's got a lot of heart and a lot of emotion to it, whilst being very funny and very clever in the way that Sarah is.
Yeah.
It's like it feels like it really has more of an impact than you'd expect from something that supposedly is just a family sitcom.
Yeah, it's true. Juliet Stevenson is in it, and she is amazing. Just in terms of jumping from one amazing actor to another.
I have actually watched all of Out of Her Mind, and I must say I can't recommend it enough. I thought it's so sort of it's very theatrical. It's got its own sort of style. It looks brilliant. It's like, it reminded me a little bit, and it might seem like a bit of a mad comparison, but of things like Bronson. So because, and I know that's not a mad thing, but what I mean is, in the way, if you like sort of Brechtian theatre, and if you like things breaking the fourth wall, this is the show for you, because that is exactly what happens in it. Not only does Sarah break the fourth wall playing herself, but the people playing her family it's one of those shows that breaks the fourth wall so many times you don't actually know. There's a moment where her sister played by, is it Fiona Button?
Fiona Button.
Fiona Button, yes. She breaks the fourth wall, but it's like almost as her. She's like, I was hired to play her sister or something. And I was like, that bit in Deadpool was like, is that 16 walls or something like that? It was like, there's so many walls, but no, it's well worth checking out, and it is on the iPlayer. So do check that out.
Yeah, cool. And our first film we made was called Nina Forever, which is on iTunes and Amazon to buy, or indeed you can go to ninaforever.com and buy a Blu-ray from us, which is also a slightly slow-moving, heartfelt thing that involves quite a bit of sex. And stylistically, it and Young Adam have quite a few similarities going on, although Nina's definitely a bit weirder.
Well, we'll put a link out to that when the episode goes out so people can check it out.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
Well, there we go. Another episode in the bag. Thanks very much to Chris and Ben for coming on. I thought that was a really interesting chat. Got a lot deeper than I thought it was gonna get at points, but that's why we love doing the pod. Please do get in touch if you've got a film you'd like us to do. If you want to give us an opinion on a film we've already done, then we want to hear from you. The email address is filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, Films and That Pod. Please do check us out. Alice, thank you very much for joining me as ever.
Pleasure as always, Josh, and thank you.
And it's goodbye from me. We'll do another film for you next week. Cheerio.
Bye.
Renew your health and wellness purpose this new year with The Reset on Alo Moves, a curated weekly program of Pilates, strength, and step goals to kickstart your fitness journey. It's a 30-day week-by-week program, 3 days of Pilates, 2 days of strength, and 8,000 daily steps, plus bonus nutrition tips from Sakara. Plus, for only $99, you get a year's worth of access to Alo Moves, on-demand, full studio experience wherever you are. Get moving today at alomoves.com.
Ever wondered just how good or bad your diet really is? The Mayo Clinic Diet has just launched its new Diet Score, a game changer in tracking your health. Your Diet Score is personalized based on tracking key activities that deliver healthy habits, support weight loss, and deliver long-term sustainable success. The Mayo Clinic Diet was developed by doctors and dietitians from the world-renowned Mayo Clinic. It's real foods, no gimmicks or fad diets, just life-changing healthy nutrition. Join today for access to customizable meal plans, tracking tools, group coaching, and at-home workouts. Everything you need for long-term success. Get your free diet score now at mayoclinicdiet.com/go. No sign-up needed. Now, the Mayo Clinic Diet accepts the Care credit card. The Mayo Clinic Diet. Healthy weight loss for life.
And now, a next-level moment from AT&T Business. Say you've sent out a gigantic shipment of pillows, and they need to be there in time for International Sleep Day. You've got AT&T 5G, so you're fully confident. But the vendor isn't responding, and International Sleep Day is tomorrow. Luckily, AT&T 5G lets you deal with any issues with ease, so the pillows will get delivered and everyone can sleep soundly, especially you. AT&T 5G requires a compatible plan and device. Coverage not available everywhere. Learn more at att.com/5G network.